The sun bathed the Kingston shoreline in golden hues as Patrice and Malcolm Robinson posed for yet another picture-perfect moment. With the Caribbean Sea shimmering behind them, Patrice leaned into Malcolm's embrace, flashing her radiant smile. To the world, they were the epitome of love, a Jamaican power couple who had it all. Patrice, a 37-year-old travel blogger, had built an online empire documenting their luxurious vacations, exotic getaways, and intimate moments. With thousands of followers hanging on her every post, she carefully curated their life to appear flawless. From candlelit dinners in Santorini to safaris in Kenya, she captured their love in every corner of the world. Malcolm, 39, was the quiet but steady force behind their lavish lifestyle. A financial analyst with a sharp mind and an even sharper suit collection, he had a knack for turning investments into gold. Unlike Patrice, he wasn't one for social media, preferring to let her bask in the limelight while he worked behind the scenes. Their love story had started 10 years ago. Two ambitious souls who found each other at a corporate event in Montego Bay. Their chemistry had been undeniable, and within a year they were married. To friends and family, they were the ultimate power couple. Successful, attractive, and deeply in love. But behind the perfect Instagram posts and dreamy captions, there were cracks in the foundation. Patrice had a fiery temper. Those closest to her knew she could be impulsive, passionate to the point of recklessness. Malcolm, on the other hand, was calm and calculating, a man who believed in control of money, of emotions, of people. Their arguments were legendary among their inner circle. Friends had witnessed the heated fights, the jealous accusations, the silent treatments that sometimes lasted for days. But they always made up, always posted a smiling photo afterward, always reassured the world that love was still alive. When Patrice announced their next adventure, a romantic getaway to Morocco, everyone admired her. Another dream vacation, her followers gushed. She had no idea that this trip would be their last. The call to prayer echoed through the vibrant streets of Marrakesh as Patrice and Malcolm Robinson stepped out of their taxi and into the heart of the city. The air was thick with the scent of spices, cinnamon, cumin, saffron, mingling with the distant aroma of sizzling lamb from nearby food stalls. Patrice inhaled deeply, her excitement bubbling over as she pulled out her phone to record the moment. "Welcome to Marrakesh, guys. Our Moroccan adventure begins," she chirped into the camera, capturing the intricate mosaics and towering minarets behind her. Malcolm, ever the reserved one, adjusted his sunglasses and gave a small nod to the camera. He had never shared his wife's enthusiasm for social media, but he tolerated it for her sake. Still, there was something different about him this time. His usual quiet nature had taken on a distant edge. He had barely spoken on the flight, responding to her chatter with one-word answers. Patrice noticed. She brushed it off at first, assuming he was just tired from the long journey. But as they checked into their luxurious riad, a hidden oasis with ornate archways, a private pool, and the scent of fresh jasmine in the air, her unease grew. "Isn't this amazing?" she asked, twirling around the intricately tiled courtyard. "Yeah, it's nice," Malcolm muttered, setting down his bag and immediately pulling out his phone. Patrice frowned. She walked over and peeked at his screen, but he angled it away from her. A flicker of suspicion sparked in her chest, but she forced a smile. "Come on, babe. We're in Morocco. Let's enjoy it," she urged, wrapping her arms around his waist. He smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. The first few days passed in a blur of sightseeing. Patrice kept up appearances, posting videos of them riding camels through the Sahara, sipping mint tea on a rooftop terrace, and shopping for hand-woven rugs in the bustling souks. But behind the filters and hashtags, things were tense. Malcolm was constantly checking his phone, stepping away to take calls in hushed tones. He was detached, uninterested in their usual romantic traditions. No stolen kisses under the Moroccan sunset, no playful teasing as they explored the city. Patrice tried to ignore it, but her gut told her something was wrong. The final straw came on their third night when they visited a high-end restaurant overlooking Jima Elfna Square. The city lights flickered below as a belly dancer swayed to the rhythm of the drums, but Patrice barely noticed. Her eyes were on Malcolm, who was once again glued to his phone. Frustration boiled over. "Who the hell are you always texting?" she snapped, her voice low but sharp. Malcolm exhaled, setting his phone down. "Relax, Patrice. It's just work." "At 10 p.m.? While we're on vacation," she scoffed. "Do you think I'm stupid?" His jaw tightened. "Not everything is about you." Patrice's blood ran hot. She had planned this entire trip, picked the perfect destinations, booked the best accommodations, made sure everything was flawless. And here he was, treating her like an afterthought. You know what? If you didn't want to be here, you should have just stayed home. Malcolm didn't reply. He just stared at her with an unreadable expression before picking up his phone again. Patrice clenched her fists. Something was going on, and she was going to find out what. The night air in Marrakesh was warm, but Patrice felt a chill run down her spine as she lay beside Malcolm in their lavish riad. The tension between them had reached its peak after their disastrous dinner, and now Malcolm slept soundly, completely unbothered, while she lay wide awake, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The constant phone checking, the secretive behavior, the emotional distance, it all pointed to one thing. He was hiding something. Her heart pounded as she slowly turned to face him. His back was to her, his breathing deep and even. The soft glow from his phone screen illuminated the bedside table. He had fallen asleep with it still in his hand. This was her chance. With careful precision, Patrice reached over and gently slid the phone from his grasp. Her breath hitched when his fingers twitched, but he didn't wake. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it. The passcode was still the same. What she saw made her stomach drop. A flood of unread messages filled the screen. Patrice's eyes darted to the name at the top. Sasha Redheart. Her pulse thundered as she clicked on the conversation. Sasha, I miss you already, baby. I wish you were here instead of her. Sasha, did you think about me tonight? Sasha, you know you don't have to stay with her, right? We could have the life we talked about. Patrice's breath came in short, shallow gasps. The latest message had been sent just hours ago, while they were at dinner. She scrolled up, her heart breaking with every word. There were weeks of messages, flirty exchanges, intimate confessions, even explicit photos. And then a bombshell. Malcolm, just a few more days, baby. I'll handle it. Her mind spiraled. Handle what? The realization crashed over her like a tidal wave. Malcolm wasn't just cheating on her. He was planning to leave her. Patrice clutched the phone, her knuckles white. Rage, humiliation, and betrayal tangled inside her. Each emotion fighting for dominance. All those years, all those sacrifices, and this was how he repaid her? A sickening thought crossed her mind. Had he only agreed to this trip as a goodbye? Her hands shook as she put the phone back, exactly as she had found it. She turned onto her back, staring at the ceiling, her body rigid with fury. She had always believed their marriage was strong enough to weather any storm. But tonight, she knew the truth. This wasn't a vacation. It was a betrayal. And Malcolm had no idea what was coming next. Patrice didn't sleep that night. She lay motionless, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of their marriage through the lens of betrayal. Every loving glance, every romantic trip, every whispered, I love you. Was it all a lie? The walls of their Moroccan paradise felt like they were closing in on her. The distant sounds of the city, calls to prayer, the occasional honk of a car horn, the chatter of late-night wanderers, blurred into a dull hum in the background. Beside her, Malcolm slept soundly, blissfully unaware that his world was about to implode. Patrice wanted to scream, to shake him awake and demand answers, but something stopped her. Not yet. She needed to control her emotions. She needed to think. By morning, Malcolm woke up as if nothing had happened. He stretched, yawning as he glanced over at Patrice, who was already out of bed, sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. You're up early, he remarked, his voice groggy. Patrice forced a smile, her fingers tightening around the phone. Couldn't sleep. Too excited for today. Malcolm nodded, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He didn't notice the sharpness in her tone, the way her lips barely curled into a smile. Good, he said, standing up and heading for the bathroom. Let's make the most of it. Patrice watched him disappear behind the door, bile rising in her throat. The audacity. He was playing the devoted husband, pretending that everything was fine, while texting another woman in their bed just hours ago. Her nails dug into her palm. She wasn't going to let him humiliate her. She was going to confront him, and it wasn't going to be pretty. Later that evening, as the sun began to set over Marrakesh, Malcolm suggested they visit a rooftop bar overlooking the Medina. Patrice agreed without hesitation. It was the perfect setting. The rooftop was breathtaking, bathed in golden light with a panoramic view of the city. The warm glow of lanterns flickered around them as the sounds of Moroccan music drifted through the air. Malcolm sipped his cocktail, seemingly relaxed, while Patrice studied him, every movement, every flicker of his expression. Then she struck. "So, how's Sasha?" The words landed like a slap. Malcolm froze, the glass halfway to his lips. Slowly, he set it down, his jaw tightening. "What?" he said, his voice low, cautious. Patrice leaned in, her eyes burning with anger. "I said, how's Sasha? The woman you've been texting? The one you miss? The one you're planning to leave me for?" A flicker of shock crossed Malcolm's face before he masked it with indifference. "You went through my phone?" Patrice laughed bitterly. "That's all you have to say? That I went through your phone? Not even a damn denial?" Malcolm sighed, rubbing his temple. "Look, I was going to tell you. When? After this trip? After you got one last vacation out of me before running to your side chick." His silence confirmed everything. Patrice's hands trembled with rage. "I gave you everything, Malcolm. I made our life perfect. And you threw it away for some random woman?" "She's not random," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "And maybe if you weren't so obsessed with appearances, you'd have seen that our marriage was already over." Patrice's vision blurred with fury. "Over?" She let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, Malcolm, you have no idea what over really looks like." She stood up abruptly, knocking over her drink. The waiter turned his head, but she didn't care. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. "What are you going to do, Patrice? 'Cause a scene?" She stared at him, breathing heavily. "No, not here. Not yet." Instead, she turned and walked away. But Malcolm should have known. A storm was coming, and he wouldn't survive it. The streets of Marrakesh were alive with the pulse of the city, street performers dazzling tourists, the scent of grilled meats and sweet pastries lingering in the air, the hum of voices blending into an intoxicating rhythm. But inside the walls of their private riad, there was only silence. A thick, suffocating silence that pressed down like a storm waiting to break. Patrice sat on the edge of the bed, her hands gripping her phone, her mind spiraling with the weight of Malcolm's betrayal. The confrontation at the rooftop bar had left her raw, seething with anger that no amount of deep breaths could calm. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't begging for forgiveness. He wasn't even pretending to love her anymore. Malcolm had checked out of their marriage, and he had done it long before this trip. She had been nothing more than a stopgap, a temporary placeholder while he set up his new life with her. Sasha. The name itself made Patrice's stomach churn. From the bathroom, she heard the water running as Malcolm showered, completely unbothered, like he hadn't just ripped their marriage apart. He thinks this is over. He thinks he's already won. Patrice clenched her jaw. Not yet. When Malcolm stepped out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around his waist, he barely spared her a glance. "I'm heading out," he said, grabbing his watch from the dresser. "I need some air." Patrice turned her head slowly, her face eerily calm. "Going to call Sasha?" Malcolm sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I don't need to explain myself to you, Patrice." She let out a soft laugh, one that didn't reach her eyes. "No, you don't." Malcolm frowned, sensing something different in her tone. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't throwing things. She wasn't even crying. She was calm. Too calm. His instincts told him to be careful. But then again, Patrice was all talk. Right? Right. Without another word, he grabbed his phone and left the room. As the door shut behind him, Patrice exhaled. Her hand slipped under the pillow, where she had been gripping the cool, smooth handle of the object she had taken from the Riad's kitchen earlier that night. A heavy marble pestle. She lifted it, weighing it in her hands. It was solid, strong, lethal. Her fingers tightened around it. She knew exactly what she had to do. Malcolm returned just after midnight, the scent of cigars and whiskey clinging to him. He walked in, tossing his phone onto the nightstand before stripping off his shirt. Patrice lay under the sheets, her back turned to him. Motionless, silent. For a moment he hesitated. Something about the air in the room felt different, heavy, like static before a storm. But he was too tired to care. With a sigh, he climbed into bed. As soon as his body relaxed against the mattress, she moved. With a quick, fluid motion, Patrice swung the marble pestle down onto his skull. The sound was sickening, a dull, wet crunch as bone gave way to impact. Malcolm's body jerked violently, his hands flailing in confusion. His mouth opened, trying to scream, but she was already bringing the pestle down again, and again, and again. Blood splattered across the white sheets, across her hands, across her face. Malcolm twitched beneath her, his body convulsing as the life drained out of him. By the time she stopped, The room was silent again. Patrice sat there, panting, her heart hammering in her chest. She stared at Malcolm's unrecognizable face. His skull caved in, his once handsome features reduced to a mangled mess of blood, bone, and tissue. She wiped a streak of blood from her cheek, exhaling deeply. Then, she stood up, calmly walked to the bathroom, and turned on the shower. The storm had passed, and Malcolm Robinson would never betray her again. The warm water cascaded down Patrice's body, washing away the blood, but it couldn't cleanse the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She stood under the showerhead, her hands braced against the tiles, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Malcolm was dead. His blood had already begun to dry on the sheets, the metallic scent filling the air of their once luxurious Moroccan escape. The marble pestle, now slick with crimson, rested on the floor beside the bed, a silent witness to her crime. Patrice closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. She didn't regret it. But now came the hardest part. She had to cover it up. Patrice stepped out of the shower, wrapping herself in a towel. Her reflection in the mirror was unsettling. Her normally composed face was hollow, her dark eyes devoid of emotion. Focus. Think. Be smart. Her first instinct was to run, to get as far away from Marrakesh as possible. But she knew better. Running would make her look guilty. Instead, she needed to stage the scene carefully. She turned back to the bedroom and surveyed the mess. The sheets were soaked in blood. The walls had splatters. Malcolm's body was slumped unnaturally, his head crushed beyond recognition. She needed to make this look like an accident, or better yet, a crime that had nothing to do with her. Patrice's mind raced as she grabbed a pair of gloves from her suitcase. One she had packed for skincare but would now serve a darker purpose. Step 1. Remove evidence of herself. She wiped down the marble pestle with a damp towel, making sure there were no fingerprints. Then, she carefully positioned it on the floor near Malcolm's outstretched hand. If the police found it like this, they might assume a struggle had taken place. Step 2. Fake a robbery. She rifled through their suitcases, tossing clothes onto the floor. She grabbed Malcolm's wallet and phone and placed them near the door, as if a thief had dropped them in a hurry. Then, she took one of the heavy chairs from the corner of the room and shoved it over, knocking a lamp onto the ground. The crash echoed in the silence of the riad. Step 3. Create an alibi. Patrice took a deep breath. She needed to be seen. She quickly changed into fresh clothes, slipped on her sandals, and exited the riad, walking briskly toward the bustling Medina. The sounds of music and chatter filled the air as she found a crowded cafe and sat at a table near the entrance. She ordered a mint tea, pretending to scroll through her phone, making sure the waiter saw her. She even struck up a conversation with a couple sitting nearby. She checked the time. 30 minutes. That was enough. She stood, paid in cash, and casually made her way back to the riad. Now came the most important step. Patrice took a deep breath, let panic creep into her voice, and dialed the local authorities. Hello? Please, help me. My husband, he's been attacked. There's blood everywhere. I don't know what happened. Her voice cracked, the perfect imitation of a traumatized wife. The operator responded quickly, assuring her that police were on the way. Patrice dropped the phone and let out a scream, loud enough for anyone passing outside to hear. Then, she sank to her knees beside Malcolm's body, making sure to smear his blood on her hands and dress, just enough to make it look like she had tried to help him. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the night air. Patrice let out a shaky breath and whispered to herself, "It's done." The sirens grew louder, echoing through the narrow alleyways of Marrakesh. Patrice sat on the floor, her hands trembling as she stared at Malcolm's lifeless body. She had rehearsed her reaction in her head. A grieving wife, shocked and devastated, caught in the middle of a nightmare. She had done everything right. She had staged the crime scene. She had created an alibi. She had made the perfect call for help. So why did she feel like something was slipping through her fingers? The heavy pounding on the door made her heart jump. Police! Open the door! Patrice inhaled deeply and scrambled to her feet. Show them fear, show them innocence. She unlocked the door with shaking hands. The officers rushed in, 2 in uniform, 1 in plain clothes. Their eyes immediately landed on Malcolm's battered body. The older officer, likely the lead detective, surveyed the scene with sharp, calculating eyes. Patrice let out a sob, clutching her chest. I don't know what happened. I went out for tea, and when I came back, he was like this. The detective glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Madam, take a deep breath. Start from the beginning." She nodded frantically. "We were just enjoying our trip. Everything was fine. Then Malcolm wanted some air, and I stayed behind. Later, I decided to go out too. I needed to clear my head after our argument." The detective's eyes narrowed slightly. "Argument? Damn it. She shouldn't have mentioned that." Patrice wiped at her eyes, playing it off. Just a small disagreement about dinner plans. Nothing serious." He nodded but didn't write anything down. That's when she knew. Something wasn't right. One officer began taking photos while another knelt beside Malcolm's body. He turned to the detective. "No forced entry," he murmured in Arabic. "No signs of an intruder." Patrice stiffened. She had staged a robbery, but she hadn't broken anything. A real break-in would have had shattered glass, a jimmied lock, something. The detective gestured toward her hands. "Madam, you said you arrived and found him like this?" "Yes," Patrice answered, nodding quickly. "So you didn't touch the body?" She faltered. I tried to shake him. I didn't know he was..." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know he was already gone." The detective exchanged a glance with his colleague. "You're covered in his blood, madam." Her stomach tightened. One of the forensic officers spoke from across the room. "The weapon appears to be that marble pestle. Blood spatter suggests multiple blows to the head. A crime of passion." Patrice's pulse quickened. No, they were supposed to think it was a robbery." The detective turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Madam Patrice Robinson, I have a few more questions for you." He gestured to one of the uniformed officers. Patrice's breath hitched. Something was wrong. They weren't treating her like a victim anymore. As they moved her to the living area, the detective spoke again. "You mentioned going out for tea. Which cafe?" She quickly named one she had visited earlier in the trip. The detective nodded. "We will check." A pit formed in Patrice's stomach. She had gone out to build an alibi, but had anyone actually seen her? Would the cafe staff even remember her? What if the time on the security cameras didn't match her story? Her carefully constructed plan suddenly felt fragile. Another officer approached the detective and whispered something in Arabic. Patrice couldn't understand, but the shift in the room was immediate. The detective turned back to her, his eyes colder now. "Madam Robinson, you need to come with us to the station." Her heart dropped. "Why? I told you everything I know." He stepped closer, his voice firm. "Then you won't mind answering more questions." Under official custody, her world spun. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had been so careful. But as the cold metal of the handcuffs closed around her wrists, Patrice realized she wasn't going home. The courtroom in Marrakesh was packed. News of Malcolm Robinson's brutal murder had spread far beyond Morocco, making headlines in Jamaica, the United States, and even Europe. The image of Patrice Robinson, a beautiful, well-educated woman, a seemingly devoted wife, had become the center of an international scandal. The Moroccan honeymoon murder. Dressed in a beige prison uniform, Patrice sat motionless at the defendant's table. Her once polished appearance had faded. Her hair was unkempt, her face pale, dark circles forming under her eyes. But she held her chin high, refusing to let the world see her break. Her defense lawyer, a Moroccan attorney named Karim El Mahdi, whispered, "Stay composed. No matter what they say." She nodded. Composed. Calm. Innocent. The prosecution, led by a sharp-eyed woman named Layla Ben Youssef, had built a relentless case against her. One that painted Patrice as a jealous, scorned wife who had snapped in a fit of rage. And the evidence was damning. The prosecution wasted no time dismantling her alibi. The cafe alibi crumbled. Surveillance footage from the cafe Patrice claimed to have visited that night showed no sign of her. The staff had no recollection of serving her after midnight. No forced entry. Investigators found no signs of a break-in. If this had been a robbery, why hadn't the intruder taken valuable items like their passports or jewelry? Blood spatter evidence. Forensic experts testified that the angle and distribution of Malcolm's blood showed he was attacked from above, likely by someone standing over him in bed. The stage scene. The detective who led the investigation testified that the crime scene appeared deliberately manipulated. Clothes thrown around, a toppled chair, but nothing actually stolen. The prosecution's theory was clear. Patrice had discovered Malcolm's affair, confronted him, and when he didn't show remorse, she snapped, bludgeoning him to death in a violent, rage-fueled attack. Her lawyer fought back, arguing that There was no eyewitness placing Patrice at the scene of the crime at the time of death. A robbery gone wrong was still plausible. Even if nothing was stolen, the attacker might have been interrupted. Patrice had no prior history of violence, no police reports, no recorded outbursts of aggression. But the jury didn't seem convinced. Then came the biggest blow. The prosecution unveiled a shocking twist. Malcolm hadn't just been having an affair. He had booked a flight to Dubai for himself and Sasha, scheduled for 3 days after their Moroccan trip was set to end. He had planned to leave Patrice for his mistress. Patrice felt her heart sink as a copy of the plane ticket was displayed on the screen. It didn't matter that she hadn't known about the Dubai flight that night. It didn't matter that Malcolm had betrayed her. What mattered was that the jury now saw motive. She had every reason to kill him. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, Patrice's hands were ice cold. She stood, her legs trembling beneath her, as the judge read the verdict. Guilty. Her breath caught. The room was silent for a moment, then murmurs spread like wildfire. The judge's voice cut through the noise. For the crime of premeditated murder, Patrice Robinson is sentenced to 25 years in Moroccan prison. The weight of the sentence hit her like a freight train. Her knees nearly buckled. As she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, cameras flashed, journalists shouted questions, and the world watched. The once happily married Jamaican wife who had come to Morocco for a romantic escape was now a convicted killer. And she would never leave Morocco again.